Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us. We are back, ESPR Boxing, myself, Niall, Gregory. We're here in, I suppose, preview mode but with a slight difference. We're going to be focusing a little bit on the Anthony Joshua fight against Otto Wallen that's coming up on the 23rd of December, but we'll be focusing it through the angle of Joshua and the trainers that he's had to get him to this point. Lads, first off, I'd like to say I hope you're both well. Hope you're both excited for this fight. As mentioned, we're going to go through each trainer in person. Really, we're going to talk about maybe the merits, the demerits of their training, their philosophy, how AJ performed under them as well. It'd be good to get your thoughts on that as well. We're going to do it in chronological order, and depending on how time goes, we might touch on, I suppose, comparisons between them, the trainers as well as Joshua as well. But first off, we're going to kick off with obviously Robert McCracken. Don't think much needs to really be said about Robert McCracken and AJ's relationship. Obviously, it was pivotal, I suppose, informative in Anthony Joshua's career. You talk about obviously the Olympics, talk about him going into the pro game. Obviously won 3 titles in McCracken, 22 fights in a row. Those nights, Klitschko, Parker, Povetkin, those sort of names. Andy Ruiz, the loss, the comeback, and then obviously into the first Usyk fight, where they split after that. But I want to just, before we touch on the split and the evolution beyond that, I want to just ask you, I'll come to you first, Greg, here. And so what was it you liked about AJ under McCracken? I suppose we've obviously, like I said, there was a knockout machine. Then he tried to turn him a little bit into a boxer. We started to see that evolution a bit under McCracken. But you personally, what did you think McCracken was good at and good for Anthony Joshua?
Elliot, I thought he was really good under it was like at first it was like Tony Sims, and then it faded into Robert McCracken, didn't it? And it was like the both of them. I like the fact that Robert McCracken seemed to be the boss in that corner, and AJ did try his best to listen to him. I thought that when Robert McCracken tended to come up with a tactic, it worked well, aside from Usyk, but I think you probably need to come up with a bit of a special tactic to beat someone like Usyk. Other than that, he had the shock loss to Andy Ruiz. That can happen to any heavyweight. It reminded me very much of Lennox Lewis, Oliver McCall. So I liked AJ's focus and probably his belief under Robert McCracken the most.
No, would you concur? Do you think that AJ was most focused under McCracken? That McCracken was the sort of disciplinarian that managed to sort of rein Joshua in a positive effect?
Yeah, I'd have to agree, to be honest. I just what I loved about that version of AJ under McCracken, it's what people have been calling for to come back. That spiteful AJ, getting out of him what he's best at. He's not a boxer. He's not this kind of elusive defensive master. He's a destroyer, and he's a great combination puncher. He's a big man, and yeah, he just seek and destroy. That's what I loved about that version of AJ, and I think we'll probably get into it a bit more, but I think I'm ranked the trainers, but McCracken was the man for me, and I thought the split was just ludicrous, to be honest. But as I say, I'm sure we'll probably get into that. But yeah, I really liked AJ under Robert McCracken. That's when he was at his best.
We are going to get into it now, and you've segued us beautifully into it here, actually. So obviously they split, didn't they, after the first Usyk fight? AJ came out with various interviews, but one of the ones I think was the complaint essentially that McCracken didn't essentially tell him to stick it on Usyk enough and was telling him to sort of box and double jab, etc., when he was losing the fight, and he should really have told him to go at him. Niall, I'll come back to you here, and you've alluded to the fact that you might disagree with the split. Is it your opinion then, if you do disagree with the split, that you think Anthony Joshua would be an improved version of what we've seen subsequently to when he split with Robert McCracken now, or do you think that no trainer after that Usyk fight would have been able to really rescue Anthony Joshua?
Any trainer be able to that Usyk fight, because I think the issue was with Joshua himself. It seems to be, I don't know what it is. He lost Andy Ruiz event, but once he got him to go, and he's not. He's just too conservative now for me. As I say, I don't know, is it a confidence issue, or is it just a lack of hunger since the money he's made, which is commendable in the sport. He's made millions upon millions of pounds. So yeah, it'll be understandable. But yeah, I think the issue for Joshua goes beyond the trainer, to be honest. No matter how no matter how talented he is, or he's 34, but yeah, he still has time to change it if he can get the right trainer and the right frame of mind. But I just think it goes beyond the trainer for me. There's a problem there more deep rooted than the trainer for me.
Greg, let's touch on on Niall's points there, but I want to come to you and ask you whether you think. I mean, obviously, we're looking at this for retrospect and hindsight now, but whether you think that split from McCracken was a good one, or do you? I mean, even at the time, did you think it was a good one? Maybe get some fresh eyes. Do you think it's a good one still now? How do you view that split from Rob McCracken for AJ?
It's difficult, Elliot, because I think some fighters have a duration with a trainer, where things may just naturally come to an end. But I want to touch point on something that you said earlier before you asked Niall that I thought was really important to mention. The fact that AJ was annoyed that Robert McCracken didn't tell him to stick it on Usyk earlier in the fight, etc. If Anthony Joshua gassed against Usyk the way he did against Klitschko in that round 5 or round 6, Usyk would have finished him. He would have stopped him. I have no doubt about it in my mind. So I actually think that's quite smart from Robert McCracken, telling him not to go firing on all cylinders. The split is difficult. I think that if he was going to split with Robert McCracken, it would need to be to another person that was really the boss and quite an aggressive coach in the corner. He's not moved to anybody else who's, I believe, more aggressive verbally than Robert McCracken. So the change didn't make sense for me, I have to be honest.
Yeah, no, I think Gregor, you've actually touched on a very good point. And I think if you look at that first fight as well, I mean, AJ, he did very nearly got AJ out of there. I think it was around 11, was he? Very, very, very close to stopping him. I agree with you, actually. I think it's actually prudent from McCracken not to have asked him to throw the sink at Usyk in that way. Moving on, obviously, the Usyk, well, they did obviously split, but the Usyk rematch was fought with Angel Fernandez and Robert Garcia in Usyk's corner. Obviously, Robert Garcia is a boxer, well known to fight fans. Obviously, worked with Daenerys Vargas, Mikey Garcia, I suppose, depending on how old you are, Maidana, you remember him from the Maidana Mayweather sort of years, Antonio Margarito. I think a lot of people actually were giving that performance that the AJ against Usyk a lot of credit. And I was just wondering, it's quite a tough question. It's obviously only had that fight essentially together. But Greg, I'll come to you here. Whether you notice anything in that training relationship between Garcia and Joshua that if you noticed the effect of Garcia on Joshua, and whether that's a relationship you'd like to have seen given more time actually than it was eventually given.
Yeah, I think I would have liked to have seen it given more time, Elliot. Robert Garcia is a very successful hard combination puncher for a trainer. He teaches hurtful shots. Look at the kind of guys that you've mentioned there, Maidana, Margarito. There's no, you can't really not see it, I would say. I would like to have seen it go longer because I think Robert Garcia has got a bit of a mentality where he has got an aggressive way of speaking, maybe not as much as Robert McCracken, but he's teaching hard, hurtful shots, and that's what we were all crying out for AJ to do. So, I think I would have liked to have seen more of that relationship at the time.
No, do you concur? Do you think that training relationship was separated far too prematurely, given the, I suppose, in some ways, the resurgence that AJ enjoyed under Usyk in the second fight?
Yeah, 100%. I'd have to agree with Greg, and it was clear to see the difference in that rematch. It really was. He still lost widely, but he put in a far better showing than in the first fight. And they only had the one fight. He didn't even have a tune-up before Usyk, and it was just it ended far too prematurely. I don't know we seen it after the rematch with Usyk that he seems to have some sort of entitlement that he should be beating Usyk. There's no shame in losing to Usyk, but the rant after the second fight, and even the first fight was the catalyst for the split with McCracken, and then the second fight he goes on that bizarre rant in the ring. So even after an improved performance, so it goes back to what I'm saying. I think Joshua has problems way more deep rooted than a coach. But yeah, I would have loved to see that kind of get to blossom a bit more than it did. One fight is crazy against a pound for pound great. There's no shame in it, and he acquitted himself much better than in the first fight. So yeah, I'd have liked to see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, after that, we've seen obviously in partner up with Derek James, another US based trainer. Obviously, I think again was he trainer of the year 2017. Obviously, see what he's done with Charlo's, the Charlo brothers. Seen what he's obviously done with Errol Spence. Highly recommended. Obviously, had a sort of ascendancy and a sort of rising star as well. Josh obviously partnered with him for, I think it was the Franklin fight, wasn't it, and the Helenius fight. No, I'll come back to you here because this is quite an interesting one, I suppose, in that relationship. Didn't necessarily, I suppose, light in the way that a lot of people wanted it to light, Were you surprised at Joshua's approach to those fights under Derek James? Did you expect more? What were you expecting essentially when he did partner up with Derek James?
I like Derek James as a trainer. I'll start by saying that I do like him, but I think we're all disappointed with them two fights. Even though one of them ended up with a big knockout. He was just way too conservative there. The Franklin fight. He didn't kind of look like he was hunting the stoppage at all, and then Helenius, he looked terrible against Helenius. As I say, I rate Derek James, but I didn't see any improvement, to be honest, in them two fights. That's just for me. So hopefully, if they stay together, there'll be an improvement, but not as of yet. I just thought he was too gun shy, really, and too conservative. Even though he did get the big knockout against Elenius, but he looked terrible before that. So yeah, no improvement there as of yet. And this Ben Davison partnership, I know it's only one fight, but this would be quite interesting to see as well.
Yeah, Greg, we'll come to you. You obviously mentioned Robert Garcia and the style of fighters that he's managed and what you'd expect from AJ. Given the style of fighters that you've seen under Derek James as well, were you surprised how AJ kind of developed or didn't develop under him, and were you expecting anything different?
Yes, I'm going to touch point on something Niall said a couple of minutes ago. I thought it was absolutely spot on. AJ thinks he's got a bit of an entitlement to be better than what he is technically. And I don't understand that, because he never showed any on your toes, moving, changing angles, etc. That type of technicality his whole career. Why is that going to suddenly start working for a guy in his early 30s? He's the first guy after Usyk to turn around and say, I'm heavy. What was it said? I'm 18 stone. I'm not throwing lots of punches. Well, do you know something? It's well known in this day and age, previous day and ages, the heavyweights haven't changed that much. To be a really good heavyweight, if you're a big guy, you need to have a solid jab and be able to time the knockout shot. It's always been the same. It will never change. With Derek James, I thought he focused too much on trying to show I've got a different side to me. I've got technical ability. I can beat these guys with my skill levels. And to be honest, I just thought he looked mentally lost. And that's not a discredit to Derek James. Derek James did the Charlos, he's Errol Spence, fantastic trainer. But look at those types of guys. Those are very technically good guys, good jabs, move around, know how to create angles for themselves. That's never going to be Anthony Joshua. So, yeah, I would have to agree with Niall. I thought the Derek James partnership, nothing against Derek James, but it just wasn't going to work for me.
Yeah, Niall somewhat ran a spoiler there in exposing the fact that AJ will now be fighting with Ben Davison. We are going to touch on Ben Davison as the last of AJ's trainers. Greg, I'll come back to you here and say it's interesting the point you made there, obviously around Joshua not showing that kind of, I suppose, technical ability that you expect from some of those other fighters, especially those lower weights, those world champion fighters. I'm going to ask you really, I suppose, is what do you expect Ben Davison to essentially do for AJ at this stage of his career? And secondly, I'd like you to just comment whether you think that actually he's the right trainer for AJ at this stage of his career as well.
This is the $1,000,000 question, isn't it, Elliot? Because it's really hard to answer. One thing I will say to Ben Davison's credit, I think if he's got something to tell AJ in that corner, he'll tell him. I don't think he's the type of guy to shy away. I think he'll say to you, Anthony, you're not doing this enough. You need to do this more. I do think he is the type of guy to do that. He is an aspiring trainer. He's had some good success, fighters like Lee Wood, Josh Taylor. It's hard to say with that relationship because he looked okay under Ben Davison, but he was dead at 10 stone. So can't really hold that against him. Lee McGregor looked okay in spots. He's brought fighters through and they've looked good. What he does for AJ, Elliot, I'm not sure, because technically I don't think AJ's ever really going to change. It's about adding to his game very slightly, not changing him completely. But one thing I think that I never thought of, and I feel a bit like an amateur not noticing this until tonight, what happens if he's a good performance under Ben Davison and the Tyson Fury fight gets made next? Who trained Tyson Fury when he was coming back, and who probably knows him almost better than anyone? So there's positives in that relationship, but performance-wise, Elliot, it's very difficult to tell.
No, I'll pick up on that as well and say that he was also, I think he was in Fury's corner, wasn't he, when Fury fought Wallen as well. So there's maybe that linking as well. Niall, I'll come to you and just ask for your comments as well. You can pick up obviously on what Greg said as well, or for your own thoughts on what you think Ben Davison essentially will bring to Anthony Joshua, what you expect him to bring, or what you hope he brings, and whether you think that's the right trainer for AJ at this time.
Yeah, I think we were all quite surprised when AJ teamed up with Ben Davison. It was quite a strange partnership, but am I correct in saying it's just for this fight that they're partnering up? Is that it?
Potentially, I mean, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, who knows what happens, especially if Ben Davison gets a serious tune out of him when he goes out and destroys Wallen. He doesn't have to, as Greg said, it's not about kind of making wholesale changes. It's about getting him back to doing what he done best under McCracken, being spiteful, throwing combinations, walking forward, kind of seek and destroy, not the kind of on the back foot boxer that he wanted to be post kind of Ruiz won or even Usyk won. It's just about getting him back to that. And I know there was the clip of him on the pads. I don't know what to read too much into that with Ben Davison, where he's throwing big combinations. So if we can get him back to his old kind of vengeful self, who knows what could happen. Derek James could be given the put to the side, and Davison could be his new man again. So yeah, I do like Ben Davison. Ben Davison gets a lot of stick. I think he gets a lot of unnecessary stick. I think he's a good trainer. He's not perfect, but he's still so young. I don't think anybody's perfect, really. Any trainer is that perfect, but yeah, still young, still improving. So I like Ben Davison, and I'm interested to see how he goes here because Wallen's going to be a tough fight for him. Wallen isn't going to be an easy fight, I don't think so. And it's interesting what you said about if he does kind of become his permanent trainer and get the Fury fight, that'll be a very interesting dynamic. Especially, I was reading earlier back on pieces in preparation for this, and a quote from Ben Davison saying that Tyson Fury would knock out Anthony Joshua. So, yeah, that'll be very interesting to see next year.
No, thank you very much. And I suppose, I'm going to have to comment here as one of the people that has been critical of Ben Davison in the past. But what I'm going to say actually is going to be quite positive here. I think I agree with Greg. AJ looked mentally lost. And I think one of the things about Ben Davison you have to give him credit for is that essentially Tyson Fury was mentally lost and broken, and he kind of oversaw that transition back. And I think it's also be big for AJ to get him sort of training with Ben Davison back in the UK as well, kind of get him around that rather than having him sort of on a satellite somewhere in the US, try and have that kind of homegrown comforts as well. So I feel in some ways it's a good relationship. I mean, what we're going to finish on, lads, actually is a bit of a different look at predictions here. We're not going to predict, I suppose, how we think the fight's going to go as such. What we are going to predict is how we think AJ is going to perform. Do we think under Ben Davison in this fight, we think he's going to be, as Niall said, on the front foot, throwing sort of power shots and combinations and looking to get Wallen out of there? Or do we think it's going to be a kind of more confident AJ, but one which is still looking to sort of box and move and have that kind of style that we're not necessarily associated with the earlier AJ? And Niall, I'll start with you. How do you actually think Anthony Joshua is going to approach this fight under Ben Davison?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying throughout the video team, that Josh and Greg touched on it as well, saying he's quite mentally lost at the minute. And I want it to be that spiteful AJ. So I'm going to say, yeah, he will show something different. I hope he still has the hunger too, and to get Wallen out of there, because as I say, Wallen is a very tough operator. So, but yeah, I don't want to sit in the fence too much and say I don't really know what Ben Davison is going to bring. It's more on AJ. Does AJ have that fire left in his belly, or is it gone forever? But we're going to find out a lot against Wallen, because if he's not up to it, Wallen could more than spring an upset. So yeah, I'll say hopefully he does kind of be that more aggressive AJ, looking for the finish quite early.
Greg, your prediction, do you agree now? Do you think we might see a more aggressive version of AJ here? What are you expecting performance-wise?
I do think we may see a more aggressive version of AJ. Whether that's because of Ben Davison, I don't know. I think he might know that he needs to be in this fight. If he sees himself 4 or 5 rounds down, he tries to get behind this left hand that's down at his waist, trying to jab. It's not going to work. He's going to end up 6 or 7 down. So he needs to get it right. I do think he's still a bit mentally lost. How much Ben Davison can do about that, I don't know. Like you made a fantastic point, Elliot, that he did bring Tyson Fury back from being mentally on another planet with the greatest of respect. His heart was not in boxing. his heart was not in his family, and he brought him back to be solid with everything. So I'd like to say that, yeah, he will make a difference, but I just think AJ is going to be forced to fight in this fight. And like I said in one of our other videos, I think he will stop Wallin, but I think it's because he's going to have to. I think he's really going to get a put on him in this fight, and it's going to force him to go to places that he's not been.
Lads, that's what we've got time for. I want to thank you very much for your time. Some fantastic points in there. Guys, who are watching the video, obviously feel free to comment whether you agree, disagree, how you sort of rate the trainers, how you think Anthony Joshua is going to approach this fight. Obviously, coming up to that main event as well. Obviously, we've got other sort of content on the channel, reviews, previews, big fight breakdowns, deep dives, all those sort of things coming up. Check us out for those. But as always have to say is thank you very much to Greg and Niall. And for you watching at home, thank you very much for tuning in.